Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another webinar from A Place in the Sun Limited. My name is Andy Bridge, and you're joining us today to talk all about the Canary Islands. So I assume by logging on, that's where your interest lies, and you may well have seen an episode from the new series of A Place in the Sun, which aired earlier this week. Laura Hamilton was taking a couple from the Wirral around the Costa Adeje, which is just north of Los Cristianos in Tenerife. They had a budget of £150,000 for a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. And that's the sort of thing we're going to be doing today, is drilling down into different locations in different islands, looking at the property types available, and essentially trying to find out just how far your money will go in securing a property across the Canary Islands. So to help me do that, I have a panel of experts, and they are more than capable of introducing themselves. So let's kick off with Alan Dennett. How are you today, Alan?
Yes, good afternoon, Andy and my colleagues. I'm very well, thank you, and appreciate this opportunity to talk about the Canary Islands in terms of which island will potentially suit clients best, in particular British clients, of course, who are our audience today. So, of course, my name is Alan Dennett. My company is Salamanca Spanish Villas. We're a UK limited company, and we trade our Spanish homes in the sun. That's what we do, and that's what it says on the tin, and that's what we help UK buyers to find a place in the sun. We've been trading in the Canaries in terms of having representation there since 2011, so we have good knowledge and experience of the islands. We have good representation across the islands, both in terms of estate agents and professional partners. So hopefully I will be able to...
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
Good man, thanks. And John Goldacre over in lovely Fuerteventura, how are you?
Yeah, I'm very good, Andy, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Coming to you live from Coralejo in Fuerteventura today. I moved to the Canaries some 25 years ago. Firstly to Tenerife, and then 19 years ago on a weekend away, we discovered Fuerteventura. Literally fell in love with the place and decided that we were going to actually move here. Part of that reason was the long-term growth prospects and the opportunity here and property prices. So 19 years ago, we moved to sunny Fuerteventura, and we've built a really strong business here across the whole of the island. And we have about 20 people working with us here in Fuerteventura. We cover top to bottom, from north to the south, with all the different types of properties. Really, it for me is a super place to be.
Right, good to hear. Thank you very much. And Richard, some of you who may have joined some of our early seminars or webinars this week and last may recognise overseas property journalist Richard Way. But for those newcomers, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, please.
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, if you've seen me before, I hope you're not getting bored of my face. But yeah, Richard Way is my name. I'm an international property journalist. So I write about, have written about overseas property for nearly 2 decades now, including a stint as editor of A Place in the Sun magazine. Now I write across a number of websites and magazines, and still A Place in the Sun. So I'm talking to people like Alan and John all the time, as well as their clients, to understand their motivation and their experiences of buying and moving to the Canaries and all of Spain. I'm also a Spanish homeowner myself, so not the Canaries. I have a house in the mainland in the Costa Brava, and I've grown up. My family has grown up with owning Spanish property, so having a second home in Spain is an important part of my life. Been there since as long as I can remember, and so I've got experience of having a second home while living in the UK, and everything that comes with that, which I can share with you and pass on any information. Thank you.
Alan, let's start with your good self. If you can just give us some kind of background to the relationship the British people have in terms of holiday making and property ownership in the Canaries. I mean, it's 220 years ago since one of the locals took exception to Lord Nelson trying to land in Santa Cruz in Tenerife and shot his right arm off. But things have moved on since then, and it's a much more welcoming scene, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It's, I mean, the Canaries are really the top destination in terms of winter sun all year round, and the British have a love affair with it. It is the go-to beach location for Britain, for Brits generally. Even in the winter months, it tends to have just as much attraction as it does during the summer months. So temperature-wise, if people aren't aware of it, then the attraction is it has a mean temperature all year round. And typically, even in the winter months, you're talking sort of low point of 15 degrees and high point of sort of early 20s. So it's and then even only in the summer months, you'll find that it's only in the high 20s. So you're not getting peaks of temperature. It's a pleasant temperature all year round, yeah? And that's the appeal of the island and its location. It's logistically, it's very easy to get to. It's served by most, if not all, of the regional airports in the UK with regular flights all year round. So it's easy to get to. It's always offering what the client is buying into, whether that's a holiday or time spent in their holiday home. And just to give you some idea of scale and numbers, in the previous 12-month period that we have sort of statistics on, you're talking 16 million approximately visitors in a year. And in terms of that breakdown, nearly half of those 16 million, 7 million in fact, are visiting during the period of our winter months between November and March. So you can see the attraction is, you can see by the visitor number. The busiest island of them all, as we're probably familiar with, is Tenerife, and that takes something like 7 million of those 16 million viewers. Then just sort of running down, just to give you an idea of scale, we're followed by Gran Canaria with 4.5 million, Lanzarote with 3 million, and Fuerteventura with 2.25 million. And typically across each of those islands, the proportion of visitors in the winter months is around getting up towards 50% again. So backing up by footfall, if you like, the attraction of the Canary Islands. And again, I mentioned logistically, it's easy to get to. Yes, flight prices might be slightly dearer than the typical flights to the Alicantes and the Malagas, but you're guaranteed the weather, which is what people are paying for when they're taking their holidays. Two particular islands that kind of stand out in terms of the weather, in terms of microclimates, if you like, and I'm sure John will add to this when we talk about Fuerteventura, but Tenerife in terms of the southwest and Gran Canaria in terms of the southern tip between Gwinnegan and Mojan, you're talking very discrete climates because they've got mountains to the north and they've got warm currents to the south. So this is the attraction of those two particular locations.
Okay, well, it might be useful at this point just to engage with our audience and see which islands they have a specific interest in. So let's take our first poll of the afternoon, if we can bring that up. Which island is it you are most interested in? Of course, this is in terms of a potential property purchase. So you've got Tenerife, Fuerteventura, Gran Canaria and Lanzarote, or one of the other islands. We are aware there are other islands. We're not ignoring the other islands, but it does tend to be the case that British people buy in these 4 islands rather than some of the smaller ones, La Gomera, El Hierro, La Palma. So it would be good to know where your interest lies. So if you want to just tick one of those boxes, please just select one of those. And then we will close the poll. And this will just give us a useful indication of where people's interest actually lies. So getting on for a third of you looking in Tenerife, 32%, a healthy number for Fuerteventura. That will please John. 1 in 4 on here, John, are looking for a place in Fuerteventura. And of course, there's good interest in Gran Canaria and Lanzarote. Interestingly, 29%. That's a good number as well. So it's fair to say they share some common characteristics which attract British people, primarily the winter sun, as Alan pointed out, and yet they are very distinct as well, aren't they, John? How's what's the temperature doing in Fuerteventura today for a start, and then give us a little insight into your island and how that island differs to the rest.
Okay. Well, today we've got blue skies. Obviously, that's one of the things that is a common factor here in Fuerteventura. We're around about 23, 24 degrees today, so that's one of the nicest things. As Alan mentioned in the intro that he just did, that is one of our common factors. We've got great weather throughout the year without the really extreme highs of temperature. One of the other best things about Fuerteventura is, of course, the beaches. We've got 167 kilometers of golden sand beaches. It's the second largest island in landmass, but the least populated. Tenerife is the first in terms of landmass, Gran Canaria the third, Fuerteventura the second, and Lanzarote the fourth, funnily enough. So that's quite an interesting factor. Fuerteventura is really the last of the big islands to be developed, and it's being done in a controlled way. There's no high-rise buildings. There's lots of open land that can't ever be constructed on. So that's one of the good things about this. We only actually have 120,000 full-time residents here. So that is one of the great things for us here in Fuerteventura. Very, very low per capita. We've got low densities of population, and obviously, of course, spread throughout the island. As Alan mentioned, we receive about 3 million tourists a year, a constant flow. That was the numbers for 2019. For 2020, I think it's going to be slightly different than that. Before lockdown, we'd received about 500,000 tourists, and then obviously the tap was turned off. But one of the great things with the island is, as I say, low traffic, great lifestyle, lots of open space, and that's one of the real attractions that brought me here 19 years ago. And from that point of view, it's one of the good things. I mean, when I first started in real estate in the Canary Islands, I built a very big company across all of the islands, so I know them personally very, very well. And for me, one of the factors of choosing Fuerteventura was the low density of population, was the lifestyle, was the beaches. We don't have any black sand beaches here. We've got one yellowy black sand beach, which is in Gran Canaria, and that's the only one really. So it's really interesting the diversity between the islands. Gran Canaria, of course, like Tenerife, is more busier. It's the parent island of Fuerteventura and Lanzarote, for example. So I mean, that's like sort of the three islands: Tenerife, El Hierro, La Palma, La Gomera, the so very different from that point of view. The islands themselves are very, very diverse. They're all different. They have all something to offer, and people have their own favourites that are in their heart. The islands are well served with great inter-island ferry and plane services. So to travel between the islands is very, very easy. And of course, we've had some people come over from Canaries, Gran Canaria, and Lanzarote to look at property here while they've been looking at property in the other islands, because it is that easy. So that's one of the good things from that point of view of the island. Gran Canaria.
Just jump in there for a second, John. One of those people who'd like to travel to the islands is Hayley Haynes, who sent in a question. I should have said earlier to everybody, apologies, I did forget. There's a question mark icon on your screen. So at any point, please do just click that and send in your questions for John, Alan and Richard. And thank you, Hayley Haynes, for doing so. She's asking you, John, to get your crystal ball out. She said she's got a flight booked to Fuerteventura at the end of September. do you think the Canaries will be open to British holidaymakers by then? I think any answer to that is just speculation, but why not just give us a quick insight to the current situation of the COVID situation in Fuerteventura at the moment and the impact it's had?
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we've been very lucky in terms of all of the islands, really. We've had a very, very low impact from the COVID-19 virus. The death rate here has been minimal across the islands. I mean, for example, Fuerteventura has actually had 45 cases in total. We've got currently 1 active, 1 in hospital, and zero people have lost their lives. So that's a really positive thing. Lanzarote is the next best one with 84 cases, 6 deaths, and there's 9 active today. So that gives you some idea about the other islands in terms of how it's going. Tenerife was the first to actually have a case, and they've had the biggest numbers. There. In terms of flights, this is quite interesting because we've been very lucky. The tourism board here in Fuerteventura keeps in touch with all of the businesses. So we've had a lot of information during lockdown. There has been some big meetings yesterday in the EU. Social distancing isn't going to make the place plain, right? And I've had a thing through this morning detailing that. So there's going to be no middle seat left empty. That is a new initiative, and that's been brought in. Masks and gloves are going to be in place for all staff. Passengers are going to have to wear masks. So they're talking about first flight, and again, this is all the EU generated. I mean, EU are going to press the button on this, obviously with the main governments of each country. But they're talking about starting flights here mid-June. So that's a positive. Sign. That's Jet2, I suppose, starting mid-June. TUI, and these are not just from the UK, but from some other destinations as well.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, before we move on to specifics about location and property prices, Richard, you're a seasoned journalist and, as you said earlier, a property owner in Spain. Putting yourself in the shoes of a potential buyer in the Canary Islands, can you just give us an overview of how you should prepare yourself to present as a serious buyer, and what will make the likes of John and Alan be interested in you as a potential client? What are sort of the basic things to get in place before you start getting out there looking at properties?
Thanks, Andy. I think your starting point is your approach to how you work with your agent when you're buying in the Canaries, not just the Canaries, but anywhere abroad, mainland Spain, because you're going to work a lot more closely with them than you would with a UK estate agent. You're going to build a relationship with them, a working relationship. You're going to, they will want to get to know you as well as they can, and you want to treat them more as a property finder, someone who's going to go and look for your property, because you won't have the time or the ability to be browsing across the island of Fuerteventura or Tenerife, whichever it is, picking properties. So what you want to do is build a relationship with them. They will then go and match your requirements to properties, their locality, or usually they're wider than their locality. They'll have relationships with other agents perhaps, and they will find a property that suits you. So it's a different process. So you will probably make contact with agents before you do a viewing trip. You want to filter it down to maybe 1 or 2 agents, someone like John, and arrange to go out to visit. That shows you're a serious buyer, and agents will treat you with seriousness and do their best for you. Go out, have a look, be honest about your budget as well, and also understand things like currencies are going to affect your budget. Keep that in mind all the time. Whatever your sterling budget is today, it will be fixed to a euro exchange rate today, but in 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 2 months, that will have moved with the exchange rate. And at the moment, because so much is happening. We've got Brexit to do, we've got effects of coronavirus, exchange rates are moving. Your budget can move as well, so bear that in mind. The other thing to think about when you're looking at your budget and how much your agent can go and spend or go and find you when they're finding your properties, of course, your buying costs. So whatever property you choose, you're going to look to spend around about 10% on top of that to cover your transfer tax, your legal fees, your notary fees, any other taxes and fees. So 10%. It's a bit less than the Canaries, I think I'm right, because it's a lower transfer tax, 6.5%. So you've got an advantage there to buying in most parts of mainland Spain, where it can be up to about 10%, which is a good thing. So you've got to think about currency, you've got to be building in buying costs, your budget, and then speak to your agent, tell them what your realistic budget is, tell them what your motivation for buying is. I'm sure John and Alan will vouch for the fact that a lot of people arrive in Fuerteventura or whichever island, and they're set on the type of property and location they want, but within a day or two of being there and being shown around, and the goalposts have shifted hugely, because you've got there and it's never the same as what you have in your head. You can only learn so much from pictures and listings on websites. Best thing to get out there. Another way to show serious intention to buy, of course, is if you're buying with a mortgage, start thinking about getting an agreement in principle. You go and make offers to a buyer, a vendor. When you've got that in place, they're going to take you very seriously. And then you need to think about having an independent lawyer lined up who will oversee your transaction for you and safeguard your interests. That's it, really. But the main thing is trust your agent as well. When you get to meet people like John, he's bought there himself. He's helped thousands of people do what you've done. He knows the process. You're not just buying a property when you buy a property in Spain or anywhere abroad. You're actually setting up a new fiscal identity. You're going to have to register with the tax office there. You might have to pay rental income. You're going to have to file a rental return, even if you don't affect your property. So you are creating a whole new fiscal identity and opening bank accounts, all these things that come with buying abroad. Let them help lots of people, and you should be fine.
Yeah, we're getting lots of questions through about rentals, and I know there are some issues about letting out property in particular areas of the Canary Islands, but we'll come on to that later. I guess it's also important at this point, Richard, just to, you've explained there the role of the agent, but also the role of an independent lawyer to act for you in such a transaction.
Yeah, I've said that, you're setting up a whole new identity in a different country. You're in a country with different property laws, different language, documentation is going to be in Spanish. Do you understand the local property law of where you're buying, planning, regulation, all these things? You wouldn't buy in the UK without using a solicitor. Why would you buy somewhere where you're even less familiar with the landscape, the legal landscape, the finance and the rules without an independent solicitor? So they're going to help you with not only things like getting your tax registration number, they'll help with your bank account, but also they have an ongoing services, so they'll help with filing your tax return if you want them to. They'll help you to draft a Spanish will as well, which is something everyone who has assets in Spain tries to do. Yeah, you're spending a lot of money. You're spending life savings, or you've sold a UK home and you're going out to reinvest it in a home in the Canaries. This is not a one-off, low ticket transaction. This is a big transaction for most people. Why would you risk the small cost of their fees not to protect yourself?
Okay, thanks, Richard. Now we're not going to have time to go through every island and every location, but Alan, turning to you and thinking about Tenerife and the principal locations. I guess most people are familiar with the south, the southwest, Los Cristianos, Las Americas, the regions around there. What's your, if there is such a thing, what's your typical buyer looking for, and what's their profile? What sort of budget do they tend to have, and what sort of stuff are you showing them?
Sure. Can I just add one point to Richard's comments about lawyers and the importance, if I may, Andy, yeah? Just
Sure.
to say that, and I'm sure John would agree with this, I cannot overemphasize to potential buyers the importance from personal experience as well as business experience with many clients to use the services of a local, independent, English-speaking, qualified lawyer. That is the most important investment of your time and the minimal cost of the overall project that will ensure you're protecting your interests. I know, Richard, you use the same term. Not only your interest, but your financial investment. And I can't overemphasize that clients should seek to engage with a local, recognized, independent English-speaking solicitor. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think just to add at this point, while we're not covering the legal side of it in detail today, a couple of questions about fees. I think we'd normally reckon about 1% of purchase price, or a sort of a minimum of €1,500, something around that kind of level. And obviously it can go up and up depending what's involved. But for basic conveyancing, that gives people some sort of idea. So, Alan, turning to property types and your typical buyer, what sort of people do you speak to and help out?
Sure. And look, I want to mention about Tenerife, but there's one other important fact. John alluded to it on the COVID-19, but I think what is also really important for people who are considering the Canaries to understand is, this virus pandemic has emphasized just how important clean air is. And of course, a lot of people in the Canaries will talk about the fact why they've not been hit by it so badly is because there's no pollution there. So not just about this virus, but for future reference, the benefit of buying in the island where it's a healthy location, you're going to get a much better healthy lifestyle and be less at risk for future possible problems. Yeah, so I think that's really important to be noting. So let's talk about Tenerife. Thank you, Andy. Yeah. Well, Tenerife, of course, is, to those who might not be aware, we have a very clear demarcation between the north and south of the islands, as you alluded to, Andy. Predominantly, the British have flocked in their thousands to the southwest coast because of the unique climate, because of the popularity of the amenities, the facilities, the fact that there are lots of developments there. But also the north offers a contrast to that in terms of it's a cooler climate, it's not as British, if you like, inclined, it's more traditional Spanish, there's more culture in the north. But again, it's all about what the lifestyle requirement is for you as a potential client. What are you looking for in the Canary Islands and in Tenerife in particular? So in Tenerife in the southwest, you've got access, you've got lots of entertainment, you've got beaches, you've got promenades, you've got pubs, clubs, international restaurants. So there's nothing that you can't do in Tenerife. Okay, so
just take me through. Let me give you a suggested budget then. Laura's couple on Tuesday on the TV show had 150, which I know is at the lower end. But what would £200,000 get me in some of the key locations that you're referring to?
Well, typically, if we think of the ideal, the preferred location, the popular locations, good quality property, furnished to a good standard, with good access to facilities, a one-bedroom apartment is going to start circa 150,000. A two-bedroom apartment is going to be upwards from 200,000. That's, there's always be exceptions. There'll always be a deal and there'll always be a property that needs some refurbishment that will come under the typical budget. But for a one bedroom, you're talking circa 150, and for a two bedroom, again, with the proviso of meeting, your expectations, you're talking, 200,000 plus.
And is that pretty much the same around that southwest region area? I know it's kind of it's spread and developed up each coast, but is that a pretty standard price point around that area?
if you venture north towards Los Gigantes, let's say, or if you venture south to Golf del Ser and coming round the bottom towards the airport, El Medano, then prices will come off that scale. Not dramatically, but you'll maybe come down 10, 15,000 on those prices, but not dramatically, yeah?
Okay. And John, how does that compare to Fuerteventura? I guess, look, the Canary Islands are never going to be the cheapest, but I think it's useful to compare and contrast with, well, between the islands and with mainland Spain. So what sort of property would that budget get you?
Well, the point that you make there about the Canaries not being the cheapest, it's quite an interesting point, because a lot of people think the Canaries in general can be expensive. The key thing with the Canaries is that you've got a lot of protection here, because there isn't that many properties when you compare to mainland Spain. So there is a lot of price protection from that point of view when investing your money here. But for example, to give you a good comparison, we've got some new properties that we're working with one of the banks, a one-bedroom villa with a front and rear garden, 40 square meter roof terrace, from 79,000 euros, 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, again same development with a front and rear garden, about 124,000 euros, and then we have a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom with again front and rear garden. These are all semi-detached apart from the 1-bedrooms. But they start from 152,000. Those prices are exceptional for Fuerteventura today. It's a whole new area that is already constructed. It's being sold, and we are one of the main agents for it. And there's about 300 units that are going to be sold. There's already a hotel there run by Pierre Vacances. They actually have 150 of the units, which they've taken on a 7-year contract. There's a water park there, so that's pretty attractive in terms of pricing, and some fabulously spaced properties. Even some other different places, Coralejo, for example, a 1-bedroom apartment will start at around about 99,000 euros. A 2-bedroom will be about 125 upwards from that point of view. Caleta de Busti, another popular area. You're talking about prices starting around about 100,000 euros for a 1-bedroom property there. I mean, the whole thing with Fuerteventura, and the point that you made earlier about, that Richard made, working with the estate agent, there's a lot of good local advice to give people, show them. It's all about taking people out, showing them the different areas. Quite important, and what those areas actually offer. Gran Tarajal is a place where people don't really know, but it's a beautiful Canarian town. There's a fabulous apartment there that we have, huge, 100 square meters constructed, plus 40 square meters of house, right in front of the sea. We're talking about 150 square meter apartment, 3 bedrooms. Beautiful pool. There's only 70 properties there, and that's 280,000 euros, for example. Villas will start, as I said, the price is there. You've then got Tamaragua, which starts around about the 160,000 euro mark, 250 square meter plot, 2-bedroom villa. So.
I'm just going to jump in there, John. Sorry, we are having a few issues with your sound, and it always seems to be just when you get to the point of saying the actual price. So we get the lovely description, and then the actual price, it does drop out. So we will come back to you. Don't worry about that, because it's all interesting stuff. Just looking at the questions that are coming in, and just trying to keep an eye on time. Well, actually, first question up for you, John, so let's hope your sound is back up to scratch, from Julie Johnson, and she has a question for you. If you're a cash buyer and you have funds in a UK bank account, how can you prove funds to buy a Spanish property? Well, I guess if you're a cash buyer, all issues are off the table, aren't they?
all issues are generally off the table. It depends again, of course, if you're using, if it's a bank property, the bank require more provenance of the money, where it's come from and things like that. If it's a normal resale, then there's no real issue from that point of view, because basically what actually happens is all the money that comes in, we have to get what's called bank entry certificates for, and they're presented at the notary. So it's pretty straightforward, and being particularly a cash buyer, there's never really a major problem. It is just the banks, when it is a bank property, they're normally asking for more detail of the money.
Okay. And when you when we had problems with your audio earlier, you were talking about a particular development. I'm taking that's not a new development, is it? We do have a question in from. Let me find that question again. I will find it shortly. But are they currently building in Fuerteventura? Are there new developments ongoing at the moment?
In terms of Fuerteventura, no. That the only things that are being built at the moment are individual villas. So there's been quite a few of that since the last crisis, because it's taken time to come out. There's been a lot of properties that have washed out. We've sold many complexes and things like that for banks. There's none of those left now. This is really the last one that we're selling. So in terms of new development, there isn't actually anything being built today. I've actually, apart from one thing which came through to me this morning, but there's some studio apartments that are going to be built, 40 of them in Coralejo, for example. But most of the properties, they're all individual villas that are being built today.
Okay, thank you. Alan, if I can turn to you more generally about mortgages and financing a property purchase. We've got a question in from Paul Hayes asking how easy is it to get a mortgage. Okay, he's referring to Fuerteventura. I'll ping that to you later, John. But more generally, Alan, if I was looking to buy a property in Tenerife, for example, what sort of loan to value might I anticipate? And would you point me in the direction of a Spanish lender, or do you tell me to speak to my UK bank? Where would I start?
Okay, I mean, we would advise talking to a broker. Okay, the brokers tend to, the qualified brokers, recognized brokers, tend to have better access and quicker access, and tend to give a more personal service to the client. They're not charging a premium to the banks, and typically, as I think Richard mentioned earlier, you know, when you're coming out to buy, whether it's Tenerife, Fuerteventura, or whichever island, then talk to the expert, talk to the qualified consultant about funding, about mortgages, before you even set foot on the plane. You know, get an idea of what's involved, share information. It doesn't cost anything, it's speculative. It only starts costing when we get to a mortgage in principle, because they're needing to do credit checks and so on. So use the brokers. They've got access to all the major Spanish banks, and they tend to get more competitive rates because of the level of business that they're doing. They're in the best position to know which banks are more likely to lend in which region or which island. And on a percentage basis, if you are looking to borrow over 100,000 euros, typically we're looking at a 70-30 ratio. Yeah. If it's under
30% deposit and then 70% from the bank, loan to value.
Yes.
And is that the same in Fuerteventura, John? Is that typical across the islands?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, for example, we actually help the clients with the mortgages and things like that. So we actually get in a lot of cases, before people arrived, an idea in principle in terms of what they can actually obtain. So that's quite an important part. And I think the point that Richard made, being honest with your agent, if you do need funds, you know, it's not that the agent is being nosy. They're actually asking questions so they can actually help you. So it's important for us to know how much capital you actually have available today, because we can actually then, you know, guide you in terms of the right bank, which one it is, who's actually lending the most in terms of loan to value, and that's an important side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just lost you there. I'm going to turn to Richard. Richard, you were with me on a webinar last week with colleagues from Florida talking about the Florida property market, and somebody there made a good point about that an agent there advising a potential buyer actually to take a mortgage even though they didn't need to mitigate their exposure to a weak pound. Could you just talk us through that scenario?
The first thing I just want to add something about mortgages is your loan to value will be based on the bank's valuation. So don't forget you've got 10% on top of your purchase price. So the mortgage won't be, when they work it out, it won't be factoring that in. So 70 to 30 is more like whatever it is, 65, 40, 35 or, so that's the first thing. The second thing is I was going to say was tied to what you're saying is the rates are very good at the moment. The Euribor, which is the European Central Bank rate that most
That's
European
the mortgage rate, not the exchange rate.
So I'm talking about the mortgage, the rates. Yeah, sorry, the rates you're going to get on your mortgage, they're very good in Spain, on the continent generally, because the Euribor, the European Central Bank, is in negative territory. Most European banks peg their mortgage rates to that. So you're looking at 2, maybe just over 2% for some very good terms in Spain. Combine that with the exchange rate, it can make sense to get a mortgage because you're not having to exchange and expose so much of your funds to a weak pound exchange rate at the moment. So what some people are doing, if they're savvy and they've taken advice and then they understand their exposure and what they're doing, they will put a small deposit down, so they only have to transfer a small portion of the purchase value into euros, take a Spanish mortgage, and then they'll either keep it for as long as they want, or if sterling does at some point tick back up and gain against the euro, it's going to cost them less to redeem their mortgage because the rate's gone in their favour. Of course, they might want to continue paying the mortgage anyway because it suits them and they're getting rental income in euros. But the option's there. That's the point. They've got the option.
One thing to add, Andy, if I
Would you
could.
like to comment on that, John?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to Richard's point there. There are some banks here, for example, where you can actually deposit sterling, and they will actually loan you money for, like in terms of a mortgage. So, for example, if you're a cash buyer, and again, Richard's point in terms of ensuring that you're able to, what they do is they will give, you will actually deposit, let's say it's 250,000 euros, right, or 250,000 pounds. They will actually loan you against that deposit that you give with the bank at a very competitive rate, right? And so it's not actually a mortgage on the property, it's a loan that they're giving against the money that you're holding within the bank. So if the rate goes up tomorrow, to change that money and take advantage of that, pay back that loan. So there is different ways of dealing with this, particularly with the Spanish.
We're getting a few questions in about renting a property out. I've got one here as an example from James Scott, looking to purchase a property in the Canary Islands, and he said, I would need to let it out to make it financially viable. So let's see how many other people are in the same boat as James. It's James Scott. We're just going to ask a quick question of you all out there. If you're planning to buy in the Canaries, are you planning to rent out your property? Yes or no? Is this a way that you would need to mitigate annual costs, running costs, community fees, whatever it may be? And indeed, are you planning to rent it out your property? And that includes kind of friends and families that you might do at a slightly cheaper rate. But is that part of your strategy to rent the property out? And we'll close that poll and we'll see what sort of percentage take up there is for, okay, 46-54, so roughly 50-50. So half the audience is in that enviable position of just being able to buy it and let it sit there and use it when they want, which is sounds very attractive. But John, restrictions on renting out property. What's the situation in Fuerteventura? Then we'll come to you, Alan. Brief answer, please.
Well, the restrictions on renting property is really applicable to the whole of the islands, really. So you should have a license to rent today. Okay, to legally rent today, you should have a license. Some people still don't have a license to rent and wing it, but there can be fines if you are caught. Of course, there's some areas that you can't rent either, and again this comes down to that conversation that Richard alluded to earlier, which is having that conversation with your agent, because it's very important for us to understand what you want to do with a property to actually point you in the right direction of where you can actually do that, because there's some areas where you can't rent a property today in terms of what the land is registered as from that point of view. So it's quite an interesting factor, and it's something that is really critical to actually get right. With the licensing, you must register, of course, with the hacienda, and you must submit a quarterly tax return. So again, having a gestoria is all part of making sure that that's done properly. And as Richard said earlier, lawyers can help you do that, or independent gestorias can help you do that.
Okay, just to pick up on a couple of points there, that might be what Gillian Royston was referring to in her comment. She said, if a property is classified in Fuerteventura as residential, there's problems letting it out. Is this what you're referencing? In it needs to have the right classification in place to be a rental property.
Yeah, but residential doesn't always apply, for example. So it depends on the classification of the land. And of course, the other most important thing, and again, this is where your estate agent becomes critical from that, because some complexes, even though you can rent out there, have been voted by the community of owners that you can't rent there. So if the community of owners have made that decision, then it doesn't matter whether you can get a rental license or not. It doesn't mean that you can actually rent. The community of owners have stated that it can't. So again, these are all important points to check out on a particular property and when you're actually viewing at the time.
And just to clear up a couple of definitions for some terms you use there, hacienda and gestoria, just to give us some insight.
Yeah, hacienda is the Spanish tax authorities, like the Inland Revenue. Gestoria is an accountant, basically. It's somebody who will submit your annual tax returns, because everybody has to submit an annual tax return when they own a property. And they will deal with any tax issues and submitting those and actually doing the tax returns for you and calculating the tax, putting in against your expenses that you're allowed to offset against a rental property, for example.
Richard, putting you on the spot here, what's your relationship with the Spanish taxman? Are you up to date?
I am, Andy. Thank you very much. Yes, I did mention earlier one of your responsibilities when you become a second homeowner in Spain is you have to file a return every year, regardless if you earn rental income or not. You have to make a return and a small contribution, the non-resident tax, I think they call it. For me, I pay about 150 euros a year, I think it is. And I don't actually make the return myself. I pay a local property manager to do it for me, and she charges about 50 euros for it. And I was going to mention this a bit later, actually, but property management, whether it's through the agent who you buy from or another independent one local to where your property is, in the last few months, I've actually seen just how valuable having a good set of eyes and ears locally to where you own. If it's a second home and you're not there, it really is, because of the situation of not being able to travel out to my place. I haven't been there since when I last go, end of January, which isn't that long, but I would have been there at Easter, like a lot of people, not just English people, but a lot of people from Barcelona and other towns around where my place is have second homes on the coast. They like to travel there any bank holidays they get. But a lot of these resorts, because no one's been going there for months, haven't been able to, they become at risk break-ins and all sorts of things. But if you have a good pair of eyes and ears on the ground locally who will go and check your property for you, just walk by once a week, twice a week, let themselves in, put a light on, turn the light off, whatever it is, show a bit of life around there, keep the garden looked after. It just helps to maintain security. It doesn't cost a lot of money to pay someone to do that. And I've been a bit lax over the years. I've sort of taken things for granted, but it does bring home to you the situation we're in now, how valuable good agents, managing agents, property agents are for doing that. And like John and Alan both live in Spain. I'm sure a lot of your clients become good friends, especially if they live in the vicinity of where you are. And I'm sure in that case, you don't mind just wandering past their house, and if you spot something, you'll give them a call. It just keeps the contacts open. It keeps everyone, a community of eyes and ears open to try and to look out for each other, which again you wouldn't get with a local estate agency in the UK.
That's invaluable advice, Richard. It doesn't cost a lot, but it's an insurance, and you should take heed. Can I just add some positive spins? I know John objectively has talked about restrictions and non-restrictions and what you have to do and what you haven't to do when you're renting, but can I just put some positives and some income figures as opposed to, say, costs of buying property? Because whilst property in the Canaries might be relatively more than the Costas, for instance, in terms of rental, then the islands can be a cash cow. If you're buying in the right location with a tourist license, just to give you some examples of typical rental returns in Tenerife, in the south of the island, we've talked about the typical cost of a 1 and 2 bedroom property, but in terms of rental, you are talking in the Canaries of between 20 and 40 weeks plus, and being able to generate income from your property and still have the opportunity of using it yourselves when you wish, so you're not tied in. In terms of monetary return on a studio apartment in the southwest of Tenerife, we're talking between £350 and £400 a week. On a 1-bed apartment, you're talking between 400 and 500, and on a 2-bed, between 450 and 600. So there's some really good returns to be had in terms of ROI. If you need to cover your mortgage, or you need to get a return because you're not using the property all the time, these investments can be cash cows, whether it's South Tenerife or Lanzarote or Gran Canaria or in the places in Fuerteventura. And that counteracts, if you like, the additional cost that you might be paying for the property and the slightly higher cost for your travel to and from the island.
Okay, thank you, Alan. That's a good point. I'm conscious of time. We were meant to be going for 45 minutes, but we will run to the hour because at 3 o'clock, as we all know, there's a new episode of A Place in the Sun, so we have to be finished in time for that. I think it's Jasmine on the Silver Coast in Portugal today, but that's a whole nother story, so let's not get into that. Plenty of questions coming in. Let's try and quick fire answer them to get through as many as we can before 3 o'clock. John, 2 questions for you from Stephen Connolly. He is looking to retire there in about 10 years, and he's asking about healthcare and the standard of the hotels, the standard of the hospitals. So if you could give us something on that. He's also asking about broadband. So one more general question and one quite specific. Do you get broadband, and what are the hospitals like?
Okay, we do get broadband, we do get fibre, so that's one of the most important things here. The hospitals, I can actually talk from a first-hand experience, are excellent. The hospital that we have in Fuerteventura is actually outstanding. It's like a private hospital. It's pretty amazing under the Spanish healthcare what you actually get. Obviously, the larger islands, the public hospitals are a little bit more busy, but there's a lot of private hospitals and public hospitals from that point of view. For example, with Fuerteventura, if they've got something that they can't look after and you're sick here, for example, you need heart surgery or something like that, they fly you by helicopter to the main island, Gran Canaria, where they actually have the university hospital. So health is tremendous, really. Each conurbation, each town has its own mini hospital. It has what's called a Centro de Salud, which is open 24 hours a day. You can go there if you cut your finger, or for small things, where your local doctor would be. But the main hospitals is where everything is done. So first-hand experience, the healthcare here is amazing.
Okay, and Paul Kiriakou is currently in Lanzarote, and he asked the question: is anybody doing property viewings at the moment? Have you been told that you can open up? I see from the background you're in your office. Are you able to go and look at properties yet?
We're able to go and view properties. Nick and Alexander was out yesterday with 2 different sets of clients viewing properties. So from Monday we were allowed to do that. We've got clients tomorrow that we're actually going to view properties with. So we've obviously got to be cautious. If we have people in the car, we've got to have face masks, we've got to have gloves and that sort of thing. But we have to adhere to certain rules, a metre distance between people when you're showing the property. But yes, we're open, and we're open for business.
Okay, that's good to hear. And I guess, Richard, that does move us into the territory of what seemed a big subject maybe 4 months ago, Brexit, but has since been overtaken in the headlines. The healthcare provision currently, residency status, and what might eventuate after we leave at the end of December, which is the current plan, I understand.
It is. Well, I mean, we're waiting, I suppose, to see if Mr. Johnson uses his extension option. I think he's got until the end of June, isn't he, to request an extension.
30th of June, make a decision.
Yeah. He's insisted he won't, but that was before we had the, of course, coronavirus crisis. As things stand at the moment, if you anyone moving to Spain at the moment, because we're still in the transition period, is treated as if they are still an EU citizen. They've got to still retain their EU rights, so they can move there and apply for residency, which would be ongoing, that right. So I suppose if you want to be absolutely certain, get to Spain as soon as you can. That doesn't mean that there won't be provision made after, but we just don't know. There's no definite. If you move as a pensioner, you can take your S1 form from the Department of Health and Pensions, and that then means you get automatic entitlement to the same level of state healthcare as a Spanish national, which is a good thing to do. If you are not of pension age, you can either opt for different levels of medical care. There are lots of local firms that do it, far more choice than over here. There are medical firms set up for the expat market, and you get all sorts of, like I said, levels of it, where it includes unlimited access to GPs, certain level of hospital care, anything from 100+ euros a month. There also is an opt-in, maybe John and Alan can give more, but there's an opt-in, what do they call it, pay-in option to the national, to the Spanish state healthcare system. I think it's about 100 euros or something a month.
It's actually slightly less than that, but yes, you can. You can opt in and take the Spanish national health system, and it's something that you pay to the Social Security. Yes.
So it's an alternative to private healthcare. Ultimately, what you're trying to do is get when you're moving to Spain, as I said, move before Brexit or the end of the transition period. Because ultimately what you want to do is aim to get permanent residency status, which you'll get after 5 years of your temporary residency, your renewable one, and then after 10 years you've got the option of going for citizenship. But if you aim to get permanent residency status, then you're pretty much home and dry being able to stay there. You'll need to prove your income for any types of residency. So I'm hearing some people in the mainland at least saying start paying regular amounts into a Spanish bank account now, just to prove you've got funds that will maintain your pension or whatever it is, to got funds to support yourself. Really, you want to try and get yourself in the system in as many ways as you can. Sign on the padron, apply for your residencia, get your Spanish bank account with some regular funds going into your Spanish bank account. So get signed up with the tax office, driving license, get your apply for your Spanish driving license, and you'll start building your case for staying in Spain. I don't, that's the message in mainland Spain, really. I imagine it's not too different in Canaries. John.
Okay, thank you, Richard. We are running out of time. Two really quick ones here. John, what was the name of those new properties you were referring to in Fuerteventura, very quickly, for Gillian Royston?
Gillian, they're called the Regamari. They're very near Lahares, and they are about 5 minutes away from the beach. So really nice location.
Thank you, John. And a question here, which I am going to take. John P emails in and says, is there a good website where you can find properties for sale? I mean, this is just queued up for me to hit out of the park. Well, John, aplaceinthesun.com, that wasn't a plan, honestly. Other websites are available, but yeah, aplaceinthesun.com, you can search for properties for sale. We also have a lot of buying guides for different countries, different jurisdictions, bunch of articles, helpful stuff across the board if looking to buy property overseas. So from that, we segue right into A Place in the Sun TV show. So it's time for us to sign off. Thank you for joining us for this Canary session. We do appreciate your time. And thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you to John. Thank you to Alan. Thank you to Richard. And we'll see you all again soon. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.